They told me it was just a misunderstanding, that the fines were policy, that the threats were procedure. But the night I found that document, I realized the HOA wasn't enforcing rules. They were running a quiet scam. It started the way these stories always do, a notice on the door, then another, then a final warning that wasn't final at all. Every letter signed by the same HOA president, same tone, same smug authority, same unspoken message: we own you here. Neighbors whispered but stayed silent. People were scared of liens, of legal fees, of being targeted next. The HOA board meetings felt staged, questions dodged, motions rushed, votes unanimous, even when half the room disagreed. Then one afternoon, while requesting my records, the management company made a mistake. They uploaded one file too many. Buried between landscaping invoices and meeting minutes was a PDF labeled harmlessly enough, amended enforcement guidelines. But the date was wrong, the signatures were wrong, and the language was damning. This document gave the HOA powers they never voted for. It rewrote fine amounts, removed appeal rights, and retroactively justified penalties already collected. They weren't enforcing rules. They were changing them after the money was taken. That's when I understood something important. HOAs don't collapse because of rage. They collapse because of paper trails. And this single document, it was the crack in the foundation they spent years hiding. I didn't confront them immediately. That's the mistake people always make. Instead, I started watching. The document explained everything that never made sense before: why fines jumped overnight, why appeals disappeared, why certain families were targeted while others were untouched. This wasn't sloppy management. This was selective enforcement with a profit motive. I cross-checked dates, compared meeting minutes, pulled bank statements neighbors were too afraid to look at. And the more I read, the uglier it got. The HOA president had been citing rules that didn't exist yet at the time fines were issued. Entire sections were quietly added months later, then backdated like they'd always been there. That single document wasn't policy. It was a cover story, so I shared it. Carefully. One neighbor at first, then another, then someone who had already paid thousands just to make it stop. You could see the shift happen in real time. Fear turned into confusion. Confusion turned into anger. By the next HOA meeting, the board felt it. People showed up early, phones were out, questions were sharp. When the president tried to bulldoze the agenda like usual, someone asked calmly, "Can you explain why this amendment isn't reflected in the official vote records?" Silence. That's when the smiles cracked. The rehearsed confidence faded. Because corruption only works in the dark, and suddenly the lights were on. And the document, it was no longer mine. It belonged to everyone. Once they realized the document was circulating, panic set in. Not public panic, coward panic. Emails started flying out with vague threats. Unauthorized sharing of HOA materials may result in penalties. Fines were suddenly issued for microscopic violations: trash bins 1 inch too far, cars parked at an angle, noise complaints filed at noon. It was retaliation, plain and simple. But that's the thing about bullies. When they're exposed, they don't get smarter, they get louder. At the next meeting, the board tried to rush a vote to clarify enforcement authority. No discussion, no questions, just signatures. Except this time, people weren't intimidated. Someone asked for the financial records tied to enforcement fees. Someone else asked why the HOA lawyer hadn't been present for months. Another neighbor asked why board members' relatives had never been fined, ever. The president snapped. That was the moment everything unraveled. She raised her voice, accused residents of undermining community harmony, claimed the document was being misinterpreted. But she couldn't explain the backdated amendments, couldn't explain the missing votes, couldn't explain why fines were deposited into an account that wasn't disclosed in annual reports. Phones were recording everything. By the end of the meeting, residents weren't angry anymore. They were focused. Committees were formed on the spot. Complaints were drafted. A timeline was assembled. The HOA tried to intimidate the neighborhood into silence. Instead, they unified it. And once that happened, the board's power wasn't slipping anymore. It was gone. Once the complaints were filed, things moved fast, faster than the HOA ever expected. The city requested records. The bank froze the secondary account pending review. And the HOA's own attorney, who had been quietly distancing himself, formally withdrew. That's when the board started turning on each other. Emails leaked. Finger pointing began. One member resigned for personal reasons, then another followed 2 days later. The president, the same HOA-Karen who had bullied residents for years, tried to save face with a carefully worded apology letter. Nobody bought it. At the emergency meeting, attendance broke records. Residents packed the room. Some stood in the hallway. The mood wasn't angry anymore. It was cold. The motion was simple: removal of the board for misconduct and misuse of funds. It passed unanimously. Karen sat there as the vote was read aloud, her authority stripped sentence by sentence. No gavel, no speech, just silence. Someone asked her to hand over the HOA keys and login credentials, on camera. Weeks later, the audit results were shared with the community. Fines refunded, policies rewritten, a new interim board elected from residents who had once been too scared to speak. And Karen? She didn't get arrested. She didn't get dragged out. She got something worse. She became irrelevant. No power, no influence, no one listening anymore. All because of one document, and a community that finally stopped being afraid. If you've ever dealt with an HOA, Karen, or abuse of power, share your story in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story so more people know they're not alone.